The UCLA women's basketball season is one you don't want to miss. Your top 10 Bruins are well on their way to another Final Four run. We need you to get to Pauley to support this incredible team. Led by Lauren Betts, Gabriela Jaquez, and Kiki Rice, newcomers Gianna Neepkins and Charlize Ledger-Walker. This group plays an exciting brand of basketball and wins. The time is now to come to see these stars in action. Big-time matchups are coming. Go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today. Can't wait to see you in Westwood cheering on the Bruins.
Good afternoon. Getting right down to business here. We're doing it live, doing more at 4 weekday afternoons, right after the Guy Benson Show at 3 and just before the 790 KBC News Blitz with Randy Wang at 5. Motec on Money. We're live on the air on 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at KBC.com and the on-demand Motec on Money podcast, KBC.com, Apple iTunes, YouTube, all your favorite podcast platforms. Bounce back on Wall Street today following yesterday's nearly 900-point drop in the Dow Jones Industrial Average. Today, the Dow gained nearly 600 points after President Trump today backed off from his plan to impose new tariffs on some European countries that are resisting his efforts to, obtain Greenland, and promised he wouldn't use force to get the Danish territory. This is part of a speech he gave in Davos today at the big economic forum there. The president said in a social media post that he will not be imposing the tariffs that were scheduled to go into effect on February 1st due to what he called a productive meeting with the NATO Secretary General in Switzerland that has led to a framework of a future deal with respect to Greenland. The president said he would not impose tariffs on the European nations after he reached the framework of a future deal on Greenland. He spoke in Davos today. The speech lasted for more than an hour. The president said the U.S. needs to take control of Greenland purely for security and not for access to minerals, calling Denmark ungrateful for U.S. actions in World War II. All of this coming on the back of raised tensions between the U.S. and Europe over the president's eye on Greenland. The Dow came in for a closing gain of 589 to close at 49,077. The S&P 500 of 79 at 6,876. And the NASDAQ of 270 at 23,225. The yield in the 10-year note is up there at 4.25%. Looks like tech stocks are rebounded today as part of the rally. NVIDIA shares up more than $5 today at the close at 183 and change. Gold and silver pulling back from recent highs. Gold right now down about $38 at $4,799 and change. Silver is hovering at around just below $92 an ounce here at the moment. We're also watching what's happening with the Supreme Court. Justices expressing unease today about the president's attempt to fire a member of the Federal Reserve, several stressing the importance of a Fed insulated from politics. The comments during oral arguments, 2 hours of arguments today, signaling the Supreme Court will likely follow Fed Board member Lisa Cook, will likely allow Fed Board member Lisa Cook to remain on the job, according to Supreme Court observers, while her legal challenge to her dismissal proceeds in the lower courts. As you may recall, Lisa Cook was appointed by President Biden, and when President Trump tried to fire her last August, he cited allegations that she misled lenders about her primary residence in mortgage applications the year before she joined the Fed. The president's move was the first time a president ever tried to remove a Fed governor in the Fed's 112-year history. Stay tuned. Turning now to geopolitics, Iran's foreign minister issued the most direct threat today against the U.S. after Iran's crackdown on protesters. It's turned out to be a very deadly crackdown, warning the Islamic Republic will be firing back with everything we have if we come under renewed attack. That's the words of the Iranian foreign minister today. Those comments saw his invitation to the World Economic Forum in Davos rescinded over the killings coming as a U.S. aircraft carrier group moves westward toward the Middle East from Asia. We'll be discussing what's happening in the Middle East this hour with Middle East expert and former network news correspondent and author of books about Israeli intelligence service. Dan Raviv will be joining us live later this hour. Looks like the Environmental Protection Agency has now blocked California's latest efforts to share national vehicle policy, this time including truck emission regulations. We'll get the latest on that and more on what's happening in the car business. Lauren Fix will be joining us live, co-host of the Drive Car Show syndicated radio program and also founder of Car Coach Reports. But first, on the big market moves this week, let's bring in the one and only Gabriel Wisdom, Managing Director at American Money Management and author of Wisdom on Value Investing. Gabriel Wisdom, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Well, thank you, Frank. It looks like we got a free trade break, got a new lease on life here in the international situation. There was talk about levying additional, tariffs, and we'd see those tariffs rise to some 25% for EU members like Germany, UK, France, Netherlands, Sweden, Norway, of course, Denmark. But going from 10% to 25%, that would have been very, very bad news for the markets. We've seen what the cost of tariffs has already been with regard to the reduction in hiring. And even though production, because of automation, is rather strong, but new hiring isn't. NATO members were outraged, and so the president did an about face, which he's very, very good at doing. The concerns are now that China has considerable holdings in Venezuela. I mean, that seems like ancient history now, but it's not. So the U.S. takeover there might embolden China's Xi. They have their sights set on Taiwan, and of course, Taiwan Semiconductor is the largest chip maker in the world. So this getting pretty interesting, Frank.
Certainly is, and in all this, we've seen volatility pick up on Wall Street this week with the volatility index spiking nearly 30% yesterday. It looks like it eased a bit today, but can we expect more volatility here? Are you betting on more volatility? And what about the VIX index in this environment?
Well, I think it's telling us that there are geopolitical concerns, and along with the index, the rising cost of metals like copper, aluminum, gold, silver, and so forth, they're indicating that the U.S. will see maybe a major rise in inflation and higher interest rates. We saw a huge thumbs down from the bond market this week in Japan and here in the United States, but especially in Japan. Now bonds are at 27, I should say, interest rates in Japan are at 27-year highs. So what is that telling us? The bond vigilantes, as Ed Yardeni likes to call them, are voting no on current monetary policy. It'd be nice to get some equilibrium in the markets. We just don't have it right now. The good news is that only 2 of the past 10 decades showed negative market returns. Half of those gains were some 200% or more, like we've seen over the last few years. So the historical bias is always up.
All right. In the meantime, we have gold approaching 5,000 this week. Right now, just below 4,800 at last check, and silver is below $92 an ounce here at the moment. Where do you see gold and silver go from here in all this?
Well, Frank, I think investors are using the metals to hedge any potential weakness in the dollar and, of course, hedge geopolitical uncertainty. What's interesting about silver, and I've liked silver more than gold, not because it's cheaper, it's certainly more abundant, but unlike gold, silver is very rarely mined all by itself. Some 70% of the global supply of silver is a byproduct of other metals. So supply comes on very, very slowly. Also, silver is an essential component in semiconductors. AI programs need these metals. They need gold, silver, palladium, platinum. So, we're in an interesting position. Russia remains the critical supplier of platinum, which is 30 times more rare than gold. So I'm sticking with the metals.
All right, and then there's the so-called digital gold. Let's not forget about the cryptos here. Pulling back today, Bitcoin back below 90,000 here at 89,800 or so, and Ethereum is back below 3,000. Doge at the moment at 12 cents. I know you keep an eye on all of this, and what are your thoughts about the latest movement on the cryptos here today?
Well, Frank, the president did reference the crypto situation. He said that he's been working to ensure that America remains the crypto capital of the world. He said that Congress is working hard on crypto market structure legislation, which he hopes to sign very soon. And so the Bitcoin and crypto market saw a little bit of support there. But one concern for Coinbase, for example, which is a stable coin a company, basically, is the American Bankers Association sent a letter to senators just a few days ago warning that if companies are allowed to pay interest or rewards on stable coin accounts, then the banks could lose some $6.6 trillion of traditional deposits as customers move their money into stable coins to get the additional rewards. So this too is an interesting area, lots of change.
Absolutely, and it should also be noted we did see the crypto bill delayed as the U.S. Senate panel pivots to the president's housing plans. Also, we did hear from the Ripple CEO here. Crypto markets will reach an all-time high this year, in his view. So we're going to keep a close watch on that, and let's see what else here. What about oil and we're going to be discussing the Middle East later this hour. Oil holding fairly steady at around $60 a barrel, despite the rising tensions surrounding Iran, of course, and U.S. military moves in that region. What about oil here?
Well, I think oil could be one of those geopolitical black swans, the kind of surprise event that we hadn't counted on. Venezuela got a lot of oil, but it's in a very raw form. China has significant interests in Venezuela. So this thing might not be over, and the price of oil has gone up slightly, but it's up since the Venezuela situation a couple of weeks ago. Now, the most bullish oil company about the opportunities in Venezuela has been Chevron, and those shares are pretty strong. But given what's going on in the Middle East, these latest developments, I would stick with oil. We need it. And natural gas prices are up sharply because of the big freeze coming to the eastern states in particular from the Arctic.
All right, and we have that big Supreme Court hearing today on the firing of Lisa Cook, and we're waiting for a ruling from the Supreme Court on President Trump's tariffs, which essentially said if they rule against the tariffs, it'll be a disaster here. What about that, which could happen at any moment now?
Well, if the president can control interest rates, either directly or through some sort of proxy at the Federal Reserve, would it lead to uncertainty, disruptions, higher inflation? This is not without some precedent. In Britain, this was a couple decades ago, but in the UK, interest rates used to be set by the Chancellor. And the result was the UK had one of the worst records on inflation in the world before Gordon Brown made the Bank of England independent. This was in 1997. One of the problems, and it isn't President Trump, it would be any elected top official, they can be temperamental, changing their minds, especially when the political backdrop involves falling approval ratings. There's temptation to, stoke the pumps, to try to cut rates to boost short-term demand. And that's just not the way it's supposed to work. Inflation could rise if we create too much money. A rising money supply is inflationary. So I think the Supreme Court is going to hold steady here.
All right, zooming out to the bigger picture on the economy, here it is January 21st here today, fairly early in the new year, and we still see the major averages at or near record highs. What's your gut feeling at this point on where the markets go from here and the outlook for the economy at this point?
Frank, we expected the first half of 2026 to be volatile for stocks. It hasn't been too bad, really, 3 weeks into January. There's been some unsettling developments, certainly. The emphasis on taking Greenland by force, that type of rhetoric, also led to some some shifts in the global markets, but the president has backpedaled. Still, we've got to hear from the Supreme Court ruling on the tariffs. They're likely to rule that they are unconstitutional. That's what the prognosticators are betting. And then there's some AI fatigue. The Mag 7 has been somewhat stagnant, but the good news is earnings revisions are very, very strong. They haven't been this strong in 3 decades. That's a great sign for the market. So I wouldn't give up here.
All right. At this point, Gabriel Wisdom, let me ask you the big question here. Any specific places where you're putting money now and or taking it off the table?
Frank, I'm looking at utilities because they've been very bright. They've had, you could call it an electrifying couple of years, but electricity generation has only grown about 2% per year, and it's so highly regulated. So there's new emphasis on these small-scale nuclear facilities, and I'm looking at NuScale and Oklo. The NuScale is between $19 and $20 a share, symbols SMR. They've already been approved by U.S. regulators. Oklo, OKLO, has been approved to build a prototype at the Idaho National Laboratory. And Bill Gates and NVIDIA have raised over $650 million for a new private company that makes these small modular nuclear reactors. I don't know. It's pretty interesting to me. I haven't done any buying yet, but I can see why they're excited.
Terrific. Well, exciting times here. And I was talking to somebody who's at the Davos World Affairs, the World Economic Forum. He said it was wild there with Trump being there, President Trump, today. So one interesting day after another. And as it unfolds, you'll be hearing it live right here. And thanks for following everything so closely with us here, Gabriel, and appreciate your insights as always. Gabriel Wisdom, Managing Director at American Money Management, author of Wisdom on Value Investing, live with us here on Motac on Money on 790 KBC. Motac on Money continues, 790 KBC.
The UCLA men's basketball season's in full swing, and we need you to get to Pauley Pavilion to support the Bruins. Don't miss a single chance to see this year's exciting team, led by Donovan Dent, Eric Daly Jr., Sky Clark, and Tyler Bilodeau. Pauley Pavilion, presented by Westcon Financials, the home of the greatest tradition in all of college basketball. We can't wait to have you join us as the Bruins continue to build on that legacy. With big-time matchups, go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today before it's too late. Let's get Pauley rocking.
The United States Soccer Federation presents the U.S. Soccer Podcast.
My name is David Goss, and I'm joined by my co-host Megan Klinenberg.
Everything up until this point has been an outside look at the World Cup, and now we're giving people an inside look. It is just total pressure cooker.
Watching flags come out of little plastic balls is like the epitome of everything that I love. And the World Cup is everything. It's why I became a soccer fan.
The U.S. Soccer Podcast. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Bounce back on Wall Street today following the Dow's nearly 900-point plunge at the close yesterday. We're back up about 600 points, closing up 589 at 49,077. The S&P 500 up 79 at 6876 at the close. And the NASDAQ rebounding today after yesterday's nearly 600-point drop, back up 270 today at 23,225. The volatility index, which spiked nearly 30% yesterday, pulling back 16% today. Precious metals pulling back from recent record highs. Gold at the moment just shy of $4,800 an ounce. Silver right now just below $92 an ounce. Let's pull up platinum here at $2,447 and change, and palladium at $1,856 and change. Turning now to the cryptos, we see Bitcoin hovering just below 90,000 here at 89,800. Ethereum at 2,985. Doge at the moment at 12 cents. NVIDIA, among those that bounced back today, NVIDIA stock up more than $5 at the close at 183.32. Crude oil futures still hovering at around $60 a barrel despite increasing tensions in the Middle East, with the U.S. moving additional military assets into that region as the Iranian crackdown against dissidents continues. It's been a deadly crackdown, and President Trump announcing today that it will not be imposing tariffs on several European nations. He reached the framework of a future deal on Greenland On the geopolitical front, Greenland has emerged as a big issue today, which he talked about at the Davos World Economic Forum. We'll take a closer look at what's happening in the Middle East shortly. We'll be joined by Middle East expert Dan Raviv in just a few moments here. Moteca Money continues, 790 KBC. U.S. forces continue to move their way to the Middle East, reinforcing military presence in the Middle East amid the possibility that President Trump may order an attack against Iran. The aircraft carrier USS Abraham Lincoln and its strike teams have reached the Strait of Malacca. That's between Malaysia and Indonesia, and they're expected to enter the U.S. Central Command's area of responsibility in the next week or so. The carrier is accompanied by a couple of U.S. Navy destroyers. Iran's foreign minister, meanwhile, issuing the most direct threat yet today against the U.S. after Iran's bloody crackdown on protesters today. Following all of these developments very closely, we are joined live now by Middle East expert and former network news correspondent, author of books about the Israeli intelligence service, including the latest Target Iran, Spies Against Armageddon, and Every Spy a Prince. Dan Raviv is also host of the Mossad Files podcast. Dan Raviv, thank you very much for taking the call live with us this afternoon.
Absolutely. And as always, wouldn't you agree, Frank? Another interesting day in international news, for sure.
Very much so. Very, very much so, and impacting the financial world as well. First of all, give us your assessment here on the latest comments from Iran, the bloody crackdown there, and threats against the U.S. And Israel as the U.S. continues to move forces into that region.
It's as though not a lot has changed. Just a few weeks ago, for more than a week, there were large protests in the streets of way over a dozen cities inside Iran. But the fact is the government turned off the internet, turned off most internal communications, so protesters couldn't even organize anything city to city, and then there were the shootings. And so the government in Iran confirms 3,000 deaths. They say 500 were security forces, and they're blaming the United States and Israel for whipping the whole thing up and causing the deaths of Iranian officials and officers. Of course, the United States and Israel say, no, we weren't involved in that at all. And human rights organizations suggest as many as 10,000 or 12,000 may have been killed. Now, here's the fact, Frank. We still don't know because of limited communications, but it appears that the protest movement has been quelled. People are probably afraid. So we don't know what's next, and I know that Iranians are wondering, will President Trump do anything? Because he said that if protesters were going to be shot, and later he said if they would be hanged by judicial authorities, the United States would come to their aid. The U.S. would take action. So far, even in Davos, Switzerland today, the president only said that all options are on the table.
On there live with Middle East expert Dan Raviv, and of course Greenland suddenly front and center at Davos, and here we're talking about Greenland and all this going on in Iran. So maybe something is going on behind the scenes, as you noted, Dan Raviv. Things are changing hour by hour here. In the meantime, the late Shah's son has emerged as a central figure in all of this, speaking out against what he called anti-Iranian criminal, the current head of Iran, targeting Khomeini over the deaths of demonstrators in the Iranian protests. What about his role in all of this, and is it plausible that he might be back in charge of Iran?
Well, that's a very fair question. Frankly, I don't think so, and I notice that the Trump administration has its doubts as well. Apparently, Reza Pahlavi, the son of the late Shah, did have some contacts, I believe some meetings with officials of the Trump administration, but he did not get a meeting with President Trump. And the president has said that he's not at all sure that the son of the deposed Shah would have any public acceptance and support inside Iran. So without U.S. government support, I don't know. And yet I do know that where you are right now, Frank, in Southern California, a lot of Iranian exiles and their children are supporters of Reza Pahlavi, not because they want the Shah, in a sense, to be reinstated. They don't really want a monarchy in Iran. But, Reza Pahlavi himself said he could be a bridge toward democracy. And he did promise that Iran, if he could rule it, would be pro-Western, would be friendly with Israel, would be friendly, he said, to the whole world. But frankly, I don't think he's popular inside Iran. I know some of the protesters chanted his name, but maybe that's for lack of other choices. To be frank, there really aren't any popular politicians within Iran who so far would be willing to defy the Ayatollah and his regime.
In the meantime, what we heard today from Iran's foreign minister, very belligerent comments threatening against the United States and Israel, too. And it looks like the U.S. military has made some moves, evacuating some people out of Iraq at a base there, right? And all of this as the carrier strike group continues to move into that area. What is the threat against Israel at this point? And are they prepared? I think we heard from the Prime Minister of Israel this week as well, threatening Iran if they were stupid enough to try to do something again.
Well, as a matter of fact, today, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said, we don't know what's going to happen inside Iran, but it's clear that Iran won't be the same as it was. Now, that was in part the speech of a politician who knows there will be an election in Israel this year, and he's taking credit for weakening Iran in Israel's defeat of Hezbollah in Lebanon and the downfall of the government of Syria. So Iran is weaker, and of course the U.S. and Israel hit Iran this past June in the brief war. But it's like Netanyahu said, we don't know what's next. And so he was trying to warn Iran not to hit Israel directly. There are reports, I don't know if they're reliable, that a Russian intermediary was used for Israel and Iran to exchange messages, that if they were to have an exchange of long-range missiles or airstrikes like last June, everybody would suffer. It would do no good. Well, maybe there's some hope in that. I mean, who wants a war after all? I feel that President Trump is keeping his options open with all those U.S. naval forces moving toward the Middle East. But as you reported, Frank, it'll probably be at least a week until aircraft carriers are ready in the area. And by then we could have a very different environment where, among other things, President Trump is more interested in his possible deal with the NATO alliance for rights in Greenland and maybe even progress toward Ukraine-Russia peace. There are indications that the Trump administration is making progress there, with envoys Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner heading to Moscow within the next 2 days.
So this three-dimensional chess game continues, probably five-dimensional at this point. All very important points that you rightly just highlighted here on the air live with Middle East expert Dan Raviv. What's going on in the Gaza area with Hamas? Is that holding, and what is the situation there at the moment?
Yeah, on the ground, a lot of people are suffering. I was just talking with some of my contacts in the area today and yesterday. There's been a lot of rainy weather for people who are trying to live in tents. It's just terrible conditions for the Palestinians of Gaza. We can come back to the questions of whom to blame, Hamas for starting the war over 2 years ago or Israel for pounding Gaza so hard. Whoever is to blame, it's really rough for about 2 million people there. Is there enough food? Well, even the UN is saying now there is enough food, right? The trucks are getting in. But what's the next step? Well, President Trump has commissioned a board of peace with quite a few countries, including Arab and Muslim countries, agreeing to take part. And Netanyahu of Israel today decided to take part. And maybe that will move toward progress, toward rebuilding in Gaza and something good happening. But for now, we don't see it. Hamas still has its weapons. Hamas still holds almost half the Gaza Strip. So I don't think that Israel's war aims were fully achieved. And so it's a very, very tenuous ceasefire, which has been holding mostly, but not entirely, since the second week of October.
And then all this, we've heard about recent ISIS strikes made by the U.S. too, right? Maybe zoom out to the big picture and tell us what else is happening based on your terrific sources.
Yeah, right. And you might be even surprised at that, right? A lot of people see that President Trump is juggling so many subjects in foreign affairs, add Venezuela as well, where, again, the move toward taking and taking or working with Venezuela, perhaps on oil rights and exploiting oil. But when it comes to Syria, President Trump really favors the new president, even though he's a former terrorist, Mr. Shara. And Shara, on the other hand, has been moving the Syrian army against Kurds in northeastern Syria, and the Kurds take credit for having crushed ISIS. Well, the United States has told them to try to get along, and in the middle of all that, the United States Air Force has struck bases and training camps that ISIS still has on the Syria-Iraq border. To put it mildly, a lot is going on, but I would tell you that, I've heard it from President Trump again today. He calls it peace through strength. He obviously is willing to use the military, and people have different opinions as to how coordinated it is and how well explained it is, because there's hardly ever a briefing at the Pentagon in the past year. Very few briefings, very little information comes from there.
Dan Raviv, thank you very much for that comprehensive update on what's happening in the Middle East. We've been speaking live with Middle East expert, former network news correspondent, Dan Raviv, author of numerous books about the Israeli intelligence service. His latest is Target Iran, also Spies Against Armageddon, Every Spy a Prince. We've been talking all these years, Dan Raviv, when all those books came out, and also you're the host of the terrific podcast, The Mossad Files. Thank you very much for joining us live this afternoon.
Always a pleasure, Frank.
Thank you very, very much.
The UCLA men's basketball season's in full swing, and we need you to get to Pauley Pavilion to support the Bruins. Don't miss a single chance to see this year's exciting team, led by Donovan Dent, Eric Daly Jr., Sky Clark, and Tyler Bilodeau. Pauley Pavilion, presented by Westcon Financials, the home of the greatest tradition in all of college basketball. We can't wait to have you join us as the Bruins continue to build on that legacy. With big-time matchups, go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today before it's too late. Let's get Pauley rocking.
The CJ Pearson Show.
I'm CJ Pearson, and I'm the host of the CJ Pearson Show. Every week, we'll take on the biggest cultural, political, and moral battles in America head on.
From a perspective you won't hear on mainstream media.
No spin, no filters, and no apologies.
Straight talk and fearless, real perspective.
Family, faith, country, bold truth, real conviction, zero permission. This is the CJ Pearson Show.
The CJ Pearson Show. Follow and listen on your favorite platform.
Motec Money continues, 790 KABC. The Environmental Protection Agency now blocking California's efforts to shape national vehicle policy. Washington and California locking horns when it comes to truck emission regulations. Let's get the latest on this now from Lauren Fix, co-host of the Drive Car Show syndicated radio show, and she's also founder of Car Coach Reports and does a great job there. Lauren, thank you very much for taking the call here this afternoon.
Well, thank you. Yeah, there's a lot going on. I think with all the news, it's easy to get distracted. But it looks like California was trying to make some pretty aggressive moves, and some of those were to change the trucking rules. Now, you may think, well, that only impacts California. It wasn't. The plan for the California Air Resources Board was to charge not just trucks that were in the state, and that means commercial trucks that deliver literally everything to you, whether it's your gasoline to your stations, whether it's clothes to a store, your Amazon packages, whatever it might be, but also any vehicles that were coming out of state. So if a vehicle came from Colorado or Illinois, those would all have to follow all California regulations. And that even included trucks coming from Canada or from Mexico, no matter where it was registered. If you were entering the state of California, you had to follow California regulations. And that was ended by Lee Zeldin at the EPA. And that is completely done. Thank goodness.
Very interesting. On the live with Lauren Fix, and California really has been driving national emission standards for decades, right? So this is finally they're pulling the plug on this. So what does that mean? Will every state have a say in this, or will there be one federal standard?
That should be, the whole thing should be handled by the federal government. California should never control how other Americans drive. Now, I know you're in California. I'm actually in California myself right now, down in San Diego. And, you know, it's easy to think because we're the largest state, we have the largest population, that we should be able to control the rules. But that's not how the Constitution is written. It's written that every state should have its own regulations, and the federal government has its own regulations on top of that. But it comes to the EPA, that is a federal law. That is not a state law. You can have additional state regulations, but you can't impose on either your state next to you, which is a Commerce Clause issue, such as Nevada or Oregon or Arizona, but you also can't control any of the other 49 states. And so that's why I think that it's easy for the California Resources Board, an unelected group of people, to make statements of what they would like to have, but you can't do that legally. It's interstate commerce clause, and so that won't allow those rules to go into place, and they have been removed.
All right. Speaking of trucks, what about electric trucks? Have those slipped into reverse now, along with the rest of the EV world?
The EV world has slipped into reverse quite dramatically, actually. Although some manufacturers are still saying they're going to make them, or they will make them based on customer demand. What's left on the dealer lots is probably your best selection. Obviously, Tesla's not going anywhere. They still own about 60% of the complete electric vehicle market on a global basis. So they really do have a big chunk. BYD, which is a Chinese car, we do not get them here in the U.S., and we won't. Those are on a global basis. They sell a lot of those, almost as much as Tesla's. But as far as like other brands, Hyundai is going to continue to offer their Ioniq 5 and Ioniq 6 and their EV9 from Kia. And so you'll see some of the brands offer them in minimal amounts, including Honda, where Toyota never switched to all electric. They do offer a Prius plug-in. They never transitioned completely. General Motors, on the other hand, Mary Barra, who is the CEO, has stated that she's going to stick her heels in and continue to push electric vehicles, which is interesting because the last quarter they had to write down, believe it or not, $7.1 billion. And I have a report coming out on that this week. That's a lot. That's a lot of loss. But she's still doubling down on electric vehicles. She says their sales are down. She knows that, but she still believes in an all-electric future. It sounds like she's more into the politics rather than what consumers want. And you really need to know that if you owned a coffee shop, you and I owned a coffee shop, and we were making danishes and donuts, but only the donuts sold, we wouldn't continue making danishes. I mean, it's pretty obvious. You make what people buy. That's what you're in business to do. But she's obviously been infiltrated by a lot of government regulations, and she's believing in that. And there's a lot of pressure coming from her governor, which is Whitmer, who's going to soon be out of office. But we need to understand, and Ford has done that. They took a much larger $20 billion loss over the last year, that they've said, all right, we're not going to make the Lightning truck. We're going to make what consumers want. We're going to make more hybrids. We're going to make more gasoline-powered vehicles, and we're going to make diesel trucks because that's what consumers ask for, and that makes common sense.
You noted that we're not getting Chinese EVs here, but looks like one somehow got in here, Lauren Fix, and this is the thing that Waymo is using, this so-called Waymo Ojai. We've been seeing these here in the Los Angeles area. These are these blue, like minivan type vehicles, unusual vehicles, because it turns out they're built by the Chinese automaker Zeekr. This is part of Waymo's self-driving fleet now that's being expanded here in the Los Angeles area. We see the white Waymos around and quite a few of them around, but now these blue vehicles made in China. What do we know about Zeekr?
Well, that is a problem because remember, the Chinese cars do collect a lot of data, not just when you're in that vehicle, you're riding in that vehicle, and you're on Bluetooth. Even if you have your Bluetooth open or your Wi-Fi, it will collect the data off your phone. The Chinese are masters at collecting this data, and everywhere it goes, it's collecting that data, which is why President Trump has asked that they not be available here in the States. I'm sure that they're well aware of the Zeekr situation. They could easily contact Waymo and say, guess what? Those vehicles are gone. They were using Jaguar I-Paces for a while. And some other vehicles as well. But in Canada, they said they were going to bring in 49,000 electric vehicles, which is a huge mistake. I have a fresh report that went up last night on my Car Coach Reports channel. It's also on my Substack. And it's getting a lot of traction because people didn't realize that if you buy a Chinese car and you try to drive across the border from Canada into the U.S., you could be denied because these Chinese vehicles absorb all of your data, including your passwords and everything. And that's when people get upset when you're like, wait a minute, you've got my password information. You got to remember, all this data is so valuable to the Chinese. They want to know every move we make, everything about us. So even think about the fact that if you've got one of those vacuum cleaners that runs around your house, it's mapping your house. Where does that data go? That's what people need to start thinking about.
That's very interesting. Yeah, the Waymos are using mostly the Jaguars, but now these blue vehicles, these kind of minivan autonomous vehicle. They had a driver behind the wheel for some time, but now I've noticed that the driver is gone. So apparently they've unleashed these here in the Los Angeles area. It's called the Waymo Ojai, named for a city here in Southern California, and Zeekr, isn't that the brand? That is part of Volvo now, or even owns Volvo?
No, that would be that's a different company. Volvo is producing products in South Carolina, so if they produce Chinese cars in the Volvo plant and they're completely built here, Trump's going to let them build here. But remember, it's going to cost them more to build it here than it's going to cost them to build it in China. And of course, even if there was a government subsidy, it's going to be difficult to compete. So he's trying to get more production here in the U.S. But as far as Zeekr is concerned, they try to stand out on their own as an individual company. But basically, they're considered an intelligence technology holding company. So that'll kind of give you an idea. The owner of Volvo is a company called Geely, Geely.
That's it, yeah. Terrific. Well, it's a complicated world, and we're all trying to move through it with your help here, Lauren. So thank you very much for that great update. Lauren Fix, co-host of the Drive Car Show, syndicated radio program. She's also founder of Car Coach Reports. Live with us here on Motec on Money on 790 KABC. Enjoy San Diego, Lauren, and hope to talk to you again very soon. We'll be back again with more at 4 tomorrow afternoon right here, 790 KABC.
The UCLA women's basketball season is one you don't want to miss. Your top 10 Bruins are well on their way to another Final Four run. We need you to get to Pauly to support this incredible team. Led by Lauren Betts, Gabriela Jaquez, and Kiki Rice, newcomers Gianna Neepkins and Charlize Ledger-Walker. This group plays an exciting brand of basketball and wins. The time is now to come to see these stars in action. Big-time matchups are coming. Go to UCLABruins.com/tickets to secure your seats today. Can't wait to see you in Westwood cheering on the Bruins.